My brother bragged about his $1 million startup. He told our dad, "I'm the only successful one." I smiled and signed the final merger papers. My holding company just bought his business. That happened on a Saturday afternoon in a conference room in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. My brother sat across a mahogany table in a suit he had bought specifically for what he thought was going to be the best day of his professional life. His company was being acquired. He had worked for it. He had talked about it at every family dinner for 3 years. He had told our father, our aunts, our cousins, anyone in a room long enough to listen, that he was the one who made it, the one who built something real, the one the family should be talking about. He walked into that room expecting to shake hands with a corporate representative from a holding company called Meridian Capital Group. He had no idea who owned Meridian Capital Group. He found out when I walked through the door. His face did something I have replayed in my head more times than I should probably admit. It went through 4 or 5 different expressions in about 2 seconds. Recognition, confusion, calculation, and then something underneath all of those that I can only describe as the specific feeling of a man who has been building a story for 30 years, suddenly understanding that he had the wrong main character. I sat down across from him. I said, "Good afternoon, Kevin." He said nothing. The papers were already on the table. I said, "You built something real. I want you to know I mean that genuinely. The company is good. That is why we bought it. You should be proud of what you built." He looked at the papers. He looked at me. He said, "You." I said, "Me." What followed was the most honest conversation my brother and I had ever had in 43 years of being brothers. It was not comfortable. Parts of it were very hard. Parts of it were a long time coming in ways that both of us had been circling around for decades without finding the direct path to. But before I tell you about that conference room, I need to take you back to where all of this started. To a 2-bedroom apartment in Tucson, Arizona, where my father worked double shifts, and my mother stretched every dollar until it was almost transparent, and my brother Kevin decided at 14 years old that he was going to be the one the family talked about. And I decided I was going to be the one who actually built something. Those 2 decisions ran alongside each other for 30 years. And they converged in a conference room in Phoenix on a Saturday afternoon. Hit that like button right now, subscribe if you are new to this channel, and drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from. New story every week. Let us get into it. My name is Aaron Whitfield, and I am 47 years old. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, the second of 2 sons born to Leonard and Patricia Whitfield. My father, Leonard, worked as a maintenance supervisor for a hotel chain that had 2 properties in Tucson, a mid-sized business hotel near the airport and a smaller extended stay property closer to the university. He managed both facilities, which meant his hours were unpredictable. His phone rang at inconvenient times, and his presence in our household was more consistent on the weekends than during the week. He was a man of genuine competence in the specific way of someone who understood systems, how buildings worked, how equipment failed, how to make something functional again when it stopped being functional. He had a practical intelligence that expressed itself through his hands and through the specific patient attention he gave to broken things. He was not a demonstrative man. He showed his love through what he fixed and what he built and what he provided. The apartment we lived in on East Grant Road was clean and maintained in a way that apartments in that price range generally were not, because my father spent his days off doing the things the building's maintenance team should have been doing. New caulk around the bathroom fixtures, tightened door hinges, a kitchen faucet that ran smoothly when everyone else in the building had a drip. He showed love through order. My mother, Patricia, was a medical billing specialist at a large physicians group in Midtown Tucson. She worked 40-hour weeks and sometimes more. She was the organizational brain of the household, where my father expressed himself through things he could touch and fix. My mother expressed herself through systems she could build and maintain. The family budget was her system. The school calendar was her system. The specific logistics of 2 children, 2 jobs, and 1 car for the first 6 years of my memory were her system, managed with a precision that I only fully appreciated much later, when I understood what it actually took to maintain that kind of order on that kind of income. She was also warm in the specific way that made the apartment feel larger than it was. She cooked most nights regardless of how long her day had been. She asked about school in the genuine way of someone who wanted the real answer rather than the summary. She knew our teachers' names and remembered the specifics of things we had mentioned in passing weeks earlier and asked about them. She paid attention. Kevin was 3 years older than me. He was the first son, and he occupied that position in the specific way that first sons in certain families occupied it, with the weight of expectation and the specific confidence that expectation could produce when it was channeled correctly, and the specific arrogance it could produce when it was not channeled at all. Kevin was good-looking in an obvious way that got him attention early and that he learned to use. He was charming in the surface way, quick with a joke, fast with a compliment, skilled at reading what a person wanted to hear and giving them a version of it. He was not unintelligent. He was smart enough to understand what worked and to deploy it consistently. What he was less good at was the work that happened when nobody was watching. I noticed this early. Not critically, I was not a critical child, I was an observant one. I noticed that Kevin was very good at the presentation of effort and somewhat less committed to the actual effort. He studied in the kitchen where our parents could see him rather than in the bedroom where the studying would have been more efficient. He volunteered for visible tasks and avoided invisible ones. He told our parents about his successes with a specific emphatic detail and was vague about his failures. He understood, at an early age, that the story about the thing was as important as the thing itself. I was different from Kevin in ways that I understood even as a child without having the vocabulary for those ways. I was less charming. I was less concerned with being seen. I was interested in things that required sustained, invisible attention, mechanical things, systems, the specific way something worked underneath the surface. My father's influence in this, though he would never have described it as influence or teaching. I watched him repair things constantly. From the time I was about 7, I followed him on his weekend maintenance rounds in the apartment, not because he asked me to, but because I was interested in what he was doing, and because he was patient about explaining it when I asked. He did not simplify the explanations. He told me what he was actually doing and why. He told me what the failure mode was and what the correct fix was, and what happened if you applied the wrong fix that seemed to work temporarily. He said once, I was maybe 9 years old, he said, "Aaron, the shortcuts always show up later. You can take them, but they always show up later and usually they show up at the worst time." I remembered this. I applied it to everything for the rest of my life. School was where Kevin and I diverged most visibly. Kevin was popular. He was in the right social groups. He dated the right girls. He played basketball well enough to be on the team without being exceptional enough to face the pressure of being exceptional. He got solid grades through the specific combination of natural intelligence and enough effort to stay in the comfortable range. I was quieter. I had a smaller group of friends who were the specific kind of friends that interested me, people who were curious about things rather than people who were good at performing interest. My grades were better than Kevin's not because I worked harder in the dramatic sense, but because I was genuinely interested in certain subjects, and genuine interest was a more powerful engine than performed effort. Mathematics specifically. I had the specific kind of mathematical mind that arrived fully formed, and that produced an immediate relationship with numbers as a language for understanding how things actually worked. My 10th grade mathematics teacher, a man named Mr. Castillo, who was dry and precise, and who had no patience for students who wanted credit for potential they had not converted into results, told my mother at a conference that Aaron had the best quantitative intuition he had seen in 20 years of teaching. My mother told me this afterward. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she told me most important things, without embellishment, as information. I thought about it for about 30 seconds and then went back to what I had been doing. Kevin found out about the comment. He said, "So you are the math genius now." He said it with the specific tone that was not quite mockery and not quite genuine. The tone he used when something had happened that required him to reposition himself relative to it. I said, "Mr. Castillo is usually right about things." Kevin said, "That is just school. School math does not mean anything in the real world." I said, "Okay." I did not argue with him, but I filed it away. The pattern between Kevin and me was established by the time we were teenagers, and it was this: Kevin performed. I built. Kevin told stories about what he was going to do. I did things quietly and let the results be the statement. Kevin understood social positioning. I understood systems. These were not superior and inferior qualities. They were genuinely different qualities, both useful, both real. The problem was not the difference between them. The problem was that Kevin decided early that his way was the right way, and that mine was insufficient. He started saying this explicitly when he was about 16. Not to me specifically, in the ambient way of a household, at the dinner table, in conversations with our parents. He talked about ambition and vision and the kind of person who made things happen versus the kind of person who just executed tasks that other people defined for them. He was describing me in the second category. He was describing himself in the first. My father listened to this without comment most of the time. My mother occasionally redirected the conversation. Neither of them said directly what I think they both understood, which was that Kevin was running a campaign, and that the campaign was about positioning within the family, rather than about genuine insight into what either of us was or was going to become. I said nothing. I watched, and I went back to learning everything I could about how things actually worked. I graduated high school in 1995 and went to the University of Arizona on a merit scholarship. I studied finance and computer science, not because I had a specific career plan mapped out, but because those were the two fields that had most consistently engaged the specific way my mind worked, and I believed that following genuine engagement was a more reliable path than following perceived opportunity. Kevin had graduated 3 years earlier. He had gone to Arizona State on a partial athletic scholarship for basketball that covered 2 years before the scholarship was not renewed when his playing time declined. He finished his degree in business administration over 4 years total and graduated in 1994. He got a job in sales at a software company in Scottsdale immediately after graduation. He called our parents from his new apartment and he said, "This is it. This is the beginning. I am going to build something here that the whole family will be talking about." Our father said, "Work hard." Kevin said, "Working hard is just the minimum. I am going to do more than work hard." My father said okay and went back to whatever he had been doing. Kevin's career in those early years was the career of someone who was good at selling things and at the performance of progress. He changed jobs twice in the first 4 years, not for bad reasons, for the specific reason that he was more interested in the title and the story of advancement than in the actual depth of what he was building in each role. He made decent money. He moved to a nicer apartment. He bought a car that communicated where he wanted to be rather than where he was. He called our parents regularly to update them on the advancement. He called less regularly when the advancement had plateaued. During those same years, I was in graduate school. I had gotten into a combined MBA and master's program in quantitative finance at the University of Arizona. The program was rigorous in the specific way that separated people who understood the material from people who could perform understanding of the material. I was in the first category, and I found the program genuinely demanding and genuinely engaging in equal measure. I also, during graduate school, made the most important professional decision of my life. I started reading. Not academic reading, that was required. The other kind. The specific intensive reading of someone who has decided that the field they are in is worth understanding completely, and who is willing to put in the specific hours that complete understanding requires. I read everything I could find about private equity, about holding company structures, about how significant wealth was built through the acquisition and development of operating businesses, rather than through the traditional career pathway of advancement within a single organization. I read Warren Buffett's letters to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders from the beginning. All of them. Multiple times. I did not read them for inspiration. I read them as technical documents about how a specific kind of thinking was applied to a specific kind of investing over a long period of time, and what the results of that application looked like. What I understood from that reading shaped every financial decision I made for the next 20 years. The core understanding was simple. The value in building wealth was not in earning more money from a job. It was in owning assets that generated returns. The difference between a high salary and an ownership position in something that grew was not linear. It was exponential. And the only way to build the kind of ownership position that produced exponential returns was to be very patient, very systematic, and willing to work toward a goal that would take years to produce visible results. My brother Kevin was not built for that kind of patience. I was built for exactly that kind of patience. I graduated in 1999 and went to work at a mid-sized private equity firm in Phoenix called Crestline Capital. Not the most prestigious firm in the city, a real one. A firm that did serious work acquiring and improving operating businesses, and that valued the specific skills I had, the quantitative analysis, the ability to understand a business's actual condition underneath its surface presentation, the patience to work through a deal properly rather than quickly. I was 24 years old. I was making less money than Kevin was making in sales in Scottsdale. Kevin mentioned this at Christmas dinner that year. He said it with the specific casual delivery of someone who had thought about saying it and decided it was acceptable to say in front of our parents at the dinner table. He said, "Aaron, you spent 5 years in school and you are making less than me. Was that the plan?" I said, "I am learning things that I cannot learn anywhere else." He said, "You can always learn things. The question is when you are going to start making things happen." I looked at my food. I said I started already. He laughed. It was not a mean laugh. It was the laugh of someone who believed they already understood the situation completely. He did not understand the situation at all. Subscribe now and stay with me, because the next section is where both of our paths start showing their true direction, and where the gap between us begins to grow in ways that Kevin would not see for years. The years at Crestline Capital between 1999 and 2006 were the years that built everything. I want to be specific about this because the word built gets used loosely, and I want you to understand what I mean by it. These were not the years where I had good ideas and waited for them to pay off. These were the years of daily, unglamorous professional work that was teaching me things that had no shortcut and that could only be learned by doing them. I analyzed businesses for a living. That is the simple description. The fuller version was this. I sat with financial statements and operational data and management interviews and market research, and I tried to understand what a business actually was underneath the story that was being told about it. What was it earning? What was it going to earn? What would change if a specific variable changed? Where were the risks that the people presenting the business had not fully confronted? Where was the value that the people presenting the business had not fully recognized? I was good at this. I was good at it for the same reason I had been good at mathematics in high school, because the language of it made intuitive sense to me, and because I was patient enough to go past the surface to what was actually there. My boss at Crestline was a man named Douglas Fenwick. He was 58 when I started, a former investment banker who had spent 20 years in Wall Street firms before moving to Phoenix and building Crestline into a respected regional private equity operation. He was precise, demanding, and had zero tolerance for analysis that was performed rather than real. He called me into his office 3 months after I started. He had a financial model I had built in his hand. He said, "This is good work." I said, "Thank you." He said, "The revenue projections are conservative in a way that is interesting. Most analysts coming out of grad school build optimistic models because optimistic models look impressive in a deck. You built a model that assumes the business performs at 60% of management's stated forecast in year 1. Why?" I said, "Because management forecasts for acquisitions are almost always optimistic by a factor that is predictable if you look at the historical pattern for this type of business in this type of market. The company's own prior performance versus prior forecasts shows a consistent 20 to 30% gap. I applied a similar adjustment." He looked at me. He said, "And you think the business is still worth acquiring at the adjusted projections?" I said, "At the right price, yes. The operational improvement opportunity in the distribution system is real and is not reflected in the current valuation." He said, "Show me." I showed him. He approved the acquisition. The business performed at 68% of management's year 1 forecast. The operational improvement I had identified produced a return that made the acquisition profitable despite the underperformance. Douglas called me into his office after the first-year results. He said, "You were right about the forecast and right about the opportunity, both at the same time." I said, "The pattern was visible in the data." He said, "Most people who are right about the forecast are wrong about the opportunity. They see the risk and they stop. You saw the risk and saw through it." He promoted me. Over the next 5 years at Crestline, I worked on 11 acquisitions. I led the analysis on 7 of them. 3 became the firm's best-performing assets in the subsequent decade. I also, during those years, began building the specific network that would eventually become the foundation for what came after Crestline. Not through aggressive networking in the Chamber of Commerce cocktail party sense. Through genuine professional relationships with people I worked alongside or encountered in deal processes who were sharp and who were interested in the same things I was interested in. The specific kind of relationship that formed when 2 people who understood the same complicated thing talked about it honestly. 2 relationships from that period mattered most. The first was with a woman named Renata Espinoza, who was a commercial attorney at a Phoenix law firm that specialized in mergers and acquisitions. She was 34 when we met in 2003 on a deal that Crestline was working on, and that her firm was representing the target company in. She was the best M&A attorney I had ever worked with by a distance. She was precise, creative within the constraints of the law, and she understood the business logic of deals rather than just the legal mechanics. We started having lunch after the deal closed, not romantically initially, though that developed over the following year. Professionally, because the conversations were among the most useful I had in those years. She saw things I missed. I saw things she missed. The combination was genuinely better than either of us alone. We were married in 2005. She is the reason the company I eventually built was structured the way it was. She is the reason several deals that could have gone wrong went right. She is the best professional partner I have ever had, and she is the best personal partner I have ever had, and those 2 things being true in the same person is something I understood was rare. and that I never took for granted. The second relationship was with a man named James Tran, who I met at a conference in Scottsdale in 2004. He was a technology entrepreneur who had sold his first company in 2001 and who was in the process of figuring out what came next. He was 31. He had the specific combination of technical depth and business intelligence that produced the most interesting conversations I had in those years. We talked about technology businesses specifically, how they were valued, what their structural advantages were over traditional businesses, where the market was systematically mispricing certain types of tech companies. James became my first outside investor when I started Meridian Capital Group in 2007. I left Crestline on a Thursday in March of 2007. Douglas Fenwick knew I was leaving before I told him. He was the kind of person who read situations accurately. He called me into his office 2 weeks before I had planned to give notice, and he said, "You are starting your own fund." I said, "Yes." He said, "Good. You have been ready for 3 years. I was wondering when you were going to decide." I said, "I wanted to make sure I was actually ready and not just ready to be ready." He looked at me. He said, "That is the specific difference between people who build things that last and people who build things that look good for a while." He said it as a compliment. Meridian Capital Group was registered in April of 2007. Initial capital from 3 investors: James Tran, a former Crestline Limited partner named Robert Ochoa who had watched my work over 4 years and who called me 2 weeks after I left, and my own savings from 8 years of living well below my income. Total initial capital, $4.2 million. Target strategy: acquire and improve mid-size operating businesses in the Southwest United States. Focus on companies with genuine operational value that was being undermined by structural problems. The same gap I had been identifying since the first model I had built at Crestline. The timing was genuinely terrible. I want to be honest about this, because the difficulty of the first 2 years matters for understanding what came later. I launched in April of 2007. The financial crisis began in 2008. The crisis was catastrophic for many private equity firms. For Meridian, it was difficult and ultimately useful in a way that I could not have predicted and would not have chosen. It was useful because the crisis produced exactly the kind of asset prices that a value-oriented acquirer with patient capital could take advantage of. Businesses that were fundamentally sound, but that were in financial distress because their debt structures had been built on assumptions that the crisis demolished. Businesses that their current owners needed to sell quickly, and that patient buyers with real capital could acquire at prices that reflected the distress rather than the underlying value. I had patient capital. I had real analytical skills. And I had the specific temperament for the moment, which was the ability to look at a genuinely bad situation and understand what was real inside it. Renata and I did not sleep much in 2008. We worked. We were scared in the specific way that people were scared when they understood what was happening in the economy and understood that the fund they had started 15 months earlier was sailing into conditions nobody had fully modeled. We had conversations at midnight at our kitchen table in Phoenix that were the most honest professional conversations I have ever had because the stakes were real, and the answers were not obvious, and the only thing between us and a very bad outcome was our own judgment. We made 5 acquisitions between September 2008 and December 2009. All 5 were distressed businesses in the construction supply and light manufacturing sectors. All 5 had genuine operational value underneath the financial distress. All 5 required significant post-acquisition work to stabilize and improve. By 2012, all 5 were profitable. By 2014, 3 had been sold at returns that significantly exceeded our initial projections. Meridian Capital Group had, by 2014, returned 3 times the initial capital to investors, and had a Fund 2 in progress that had attracted $12 million in new commitments based on Fund 1's performance. I was 41 years old. I had built something real. I had not announced it at family dinners. I had not told my brother what I was doing. I had not updated our parents with the specific emphatic detail that Kevin used at every gathering to communicate his professional trajectory. I had just worked. Kevin's trajectory during those same years was something I watched from a distance with the specific combination of genuine interest and the specific patience of someone who was waiting for something to become fully visible. He had left the Scottsdale software sales job in 2002 and started his own business, a technology consulting firm that helped mid-size companies implement software systems. He had a genuine sales skill and a genuine network from his years in software sales, and the consulting firm was a real business based on real demand. He called our parents when he launched it. He said, "This is it. This is the real thing. I am going to build this into something the whole family talks about." Our father said, "Work hard." Kevin built the consulting firm to about $2 million in annual revenue by 2006. It was a real achievement, and I genuinely respected it. The business was his. He had built it from his own relationships and his own sales ability and his own willingness to work the hours the work required. He talked about it constantly at family gatherings. Not in the normal way of someone sharing what they were doing with their family, in the specific promotional way of someone managing a narrative. He talked about the clients and the revenue figures and the growth trajectory and the specific opportunities ahead with the energy of someone who was simultaneously informing and performing. He also began in this period to make specific comments about me. Not aggressive comments, the specific ambient comments of someone who had decided that the comparison between us required active management. He said things like, "Aaron is still working for other people. Some people are built to be employees and some people are built to be owners." He said things like, "Aaron does the analytical work. That is useful, but analysis without action is just thinking." He said these things to our parents at dinners. He said them to aunts and uncles at holiday gatherings. He said them with the specific casualness of someone who had calculated that the delivery mattered as much as the content. What he was doing was making sure that the family's ambient understanding of Aaron Whitfield was smart guy, good with numbers, works for other people, probably always will. And the family's ambient understanding of Kevin Whitfield was entrepreneur, risk-taker, builder, the one who actually makes things happen. Our parents listened to all of this. My mother, who saw more than she said, would occasionally ask me what I was working on when she called. I would tell her in the plain, factual way I told her most things. I am analyzing acquisition opportunities. I am working on a fund structure. I am building the capital base. She said, "Are you happy with what you are building?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Then keep going." She never asked for the performance version. She just wanted to know I was okay and that what I was doing was real. Our father said less. He asked about Renata. He asked whether the Arizona heat was letting up yet. He sent me articles about things he thought I might find interesting, clipped from the newspaper or the magazines he still read in the physical form. He was the specific version of a parent who showed love through attention to the small things rather than the big ones. In 2015, Kevin started his second company. He had sold the consulting firm in 2013 for a number he described publicly as a significant exit, and that based on what I knew about the market for that type of business was probably in the range of $3 to $4 million. A real exit, a genuine accomplishment. The second company was more ambitious. He called it Pinnacle Tech Solutions, and it was a SaaS company, software as a service, focused on workflow management for mid-size construction and real estate companies. He had identified the sector from his consulting work, and he had brought in 2 technical co-founders to build the product. He raised a seed round. He hired a team. He launched. He called our parents to tell them. He said, "This is the real thing. This is the company. In 5 years, this is going to be worth $50 million, and every person in this family is going to understand what I have been building toward." Our mother said, "That sounds exciting, Kevin." Our father said, "Work hard." Kevin said, "Dad, this is beyond hard work. This is vision." Our father said nothing. I said nothing either, when my mother called me later that day to tell me about Kevin's announcement. I said, "That is good. I hope it goes well for him." She said, "Do you know anything about that kind of business?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Is it a good business to be in?" I said, "Depends on the execution." She said, "That is not an answer." I said, "The technology is real. The market is real. Whether Kevin's specific company succeeds depends on things I cannot know from the outside." She said, "But you have an opinion." I said, "I always have an opinion." She said, "Tell me." I said, "Kevin is a builder in the sales and vision sense. He is less strong in the operational and financial detail sense. Whether Pinnacle succeeds depends on whether his co-founders can compensate for that in the right ways." She was quiet. She said, "Should I be worried about him?" I said, "Kevin has always found a way to land. I am not worried about him." That was true. What I did not say to anyone, was that I had been watching Pinnacle Tech Solutions since it launched. Watching it the way I watched every mid-sized technology company in the construction and real estate software space, because that was the space I had been analyzing for 18 months as a potential acquisition sector for Meridian's third fund. I had not planned what happened next. That is important for you to understand. What happened was the result of market logic, not personal score settling. Pinnacle Tech Solutions built a real product that had real customers. It also had structural problems that I could see clearly from the outside: an overextended cost base, a sales model that was growing revenue faster than the unit economics could sustain, and a capital structure that was going to create pressure in year 3 or 4 regardless of how good the product was. I watched these things develop with the specific professional attention of an analyst. And in 2020, the pressure arrived exactly when I had expected it to arrive, and Pinnacle Tech Solutions started looking for a buyer. Subscribe right now and do not go anywhere, because the next section is where I tell you exactly what I did and exactly how I did it, and exactly what Kevin said when he found out who had been sitting across from him the whole time. Renata came into my office on a Tuesday morning in January of 2020 and put a printed sheet on my desk. She said, "Pinnacle Tech Solutions just retained an investment bank to run a sale process." I looked at the sheet. I had known this was coming for approximately 18 months. The financial pattern had been visible. The fundraising activity had slowed in a way that communicated investor fatigue with the company's capital requirements. The leadership team had made 2 significant personnel changes that were the specific type of changes companies made when they were positioning for an exit rather than for continued growth. I said, "Who is the banker?" She told me. I said, "What is the price expectation?" She showed me the preliminary range that the banker had communicated to a mutual contact who had passed it along. I looked at the number. I said, "That is optimistic by about 40% given the current metrics." She said, "I know." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Aaron." I said, "Yes." She said, "Do you want to bid on it?" I looked at her. She looked at me. She said, "This is a real business with a real product and real customers, and a structural problem that you know how to fix. The question is whether to pursue it on the merits." I said, "It is a real business." She said, "So pursue it on the merits." She said, "And yes, I know whose business it is." I said, "Does that matter?" She thought about it. She said, "It matters that you are honest with yourself about whether the decision is professional or personal. Because if it is professional, it is a good decision. If it is personal, it might still be a good decision, but you need to know which one it is." I sat with that. I said, "The analysis says it is a good acquisition at the right price. The product has real value. The customer retention metrics are strong. The problem is the cost structure and the go-to-market model, both of which are fixable. This is exactly the type of deal Meridian was built for." She said, "And Kevin?" I said, "Kevin built something real. I have never disputed that. If we acquire it, we are paying him for something he actually built." She said, "And the conference room moment?" I said, "I had not thought about that." She looked at me with the specific expression she used when she knew I had thought about that. I said, "Okay, I had thought about it." She said, "And?" I said, "And I would be lying if I said there was zero personal element. He has been telling our family for 30 years that I was the one who just executed other people's ideas. Sitting across from him in that room would be the clearest possible answer to that." She said, "Is that a reason to do the deal or a bonus?" I said, "It is a bonus. The reason to do the deal is the analysis." She said, "Then do the deal. Just make sure you conduct yourself in that room the way you would conduct yourself in any other room." She was right. She was always right about the things that required me to check my own blind spots. We put Meridian into the process. I want to explain how a sale process like this worked because the specific mechanics matter for understanding how Kevin did not know who was bidding on his company until the moment I walked through the door. When an investment bank ran a sale process for a mid-size private company, they reached out to a list of potential buyers, typically a combination of strategic acquirers and financial buyers. Financial buyers like private equity and holding companies were approached through their registered investment entities. The approach went to Meridian Capital Group, not to Aaron Whitfield personally. The initial communication was between Meridian's deal team and the banker. The due diligence process involved Meridian's analysts reviewing company materials. The management presentations, where the selling company's leadership presented to potential buyers, were attended by Meridian deal team members under standard confidentiality agreements. I was not in those meetings. I deliberately kept myself out of the earlier stages of the process for two reasons. The first was that my involvement was not necessary at that stage. I had a capable deal team who could run the initial analysis. The second was that I wanted to see the company clearly before Kevin knew I was involved, because Kevin's behavior changed when I was in the room, and I needed the objective view. What my team reported back was consistent with my external analysis. Real product, real customers, strong retention, unsustainable cost base, fixable go-to-market model. We submitted a bid. Our bid was 40% below the banker's initial price range. The banker came back and told us we were too low. I wrote back through my deal team and said, "Our analysis supports our number. We are happy to walk through it in detail with the seller if that would be useful." 3 days later, the banker called. He said, "The seller is willing to meet." I said, "Set it up." Kevin walked into that conference room in Phoenix, expecting to meet a principal from Meridian Capital Group. He had been told the principal's name. The name was on the conference room booking. Aaron Whitfield. The name had not registered. He had not connected the name to his brother because Kevin had not been paying close attention to what his brother was doing for the past 20 years. He had been managing the narrative of what his brother was doing, the story about the employee, the analyst, the person who executed other people's ideas, And the person in that story was not someone who owned a holding company that was capable of acquiring pinnacle tech solutions. He walked through the door. He saw me. The four expressions. Then you. Then me. I said, "Let us talk about your company, Kevin." What followed over the next 2 hours was the most honest conversation about a business I had ever conducted, because both people in the room had a stake that went beyond the transaction. I walked him through our analysis, the product value, the customer data, the retention metrics. I told him what was genuinely good because it was genuinely good, and because I had never been the kind of person who withheld a genuine compliment. The work he had done building Pinnacle's product was real work, and I said so directly. Then I walked him through the structural problems. The cost base, the go-to-market inefficiency, the burn rate trajectory relative to the company's current capital position, the specific ways the company's financial structure was working against the underlying business value. Kevin listened. He was a smart man. I had always known this. He heard the analysis and he understood it, and I could see him understanding it in real time, working through the numbers the way I had always been able to see him work through information when he was not managing the presentation of it. He said, "You have been watching this company." I said, "I have been watching the construction and real estate software sector. Pinnacle is the most interesting asset in that sector." He said, "And you waited until we needed a buyer." I said, "I waited until the price reflected the actual value rather than the story around the value." He was quiet. Then he said something that surprised me. He said, "You are right about the cost base. I have known the cost base was wrong for 2 years. The investors kept pushing for growth metrics, and the growth metrics required the spend, and I knew it was not sustainable." I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought I could outrun it." I said, "Most founders think they can outrun it." He said, "Did you know I would be in this position?" I said, "I knew the financial structure would create pressure in years 3 or 4. I did not know when you would decide to sell." He said, "What is the offer?" I told him. He looked at the number. He said, "That is 40% below what the bank said." I said, "The bank's number reflected the story. My number reflects the business." He said, "Those are the same thing." I said, "They are very different things. The story is optimistic. The business is real. My number is based on what the business will produce under improved operational management." He said, "You think you can fix it?" I said, "I know I can fix it, and I can pay you fair value for what you actually built while I do it." He looked at the number again. He looked at me. He said, "Aaron." I said, "Kevin." He said, "When did you build all of this?" I said, "I have been building it since 2007. He said, "You never told anyone." I said, "I told my wife. I told my investors. I told the people who needed to know." He said, "You never told Dad." I said, "Dad never asked for the performance version of things. He asked if I was happy and if I was building something real. I told him yes both times." Kevin was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that I had not expected. He said, "I told our father that I was the only successful one. At Christmas dinner last year, I said it because I genuinely believed it." I said, "I know." He said, "I said it because you never showed me anything that looked like what I was building." I said, "I know." He said, "And this whole time you were building this?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And you let me keep saying those things?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I thought about this for a moment. I said, "Because proving something to you was never the reason I was building it. The reason I was building it was the reason I have always built things. Because the problem was interesting, and because the work was real, and because building something correctly produces something that lasts." He looked at the table. He said, I have been performing for 30 years. I said, you have also been building. The performing and the building happened at the same time. Pinnacle is a real company with a real product and real customers. You built that. He said, with a lot of noise around it. I said, with a lot of noise around it, but the thing itself is real. He said, and you are going to buy it. I said, if we can agree on terms. He said, at your number. I said, at a number we can both get to honestly. I am not trying to take something from you. I am trying to pay fair value for something real. We negotiated for 3 more sessions over the following 2 weeks. Renata handled the legal structure. Kevin had his own attorney and his own financial advisor, and the process was genuinely arm's length despite the family connection. I insisted on that. I would not do a deal with my brother that was not as rigorous as any other deal I had ever done, because a deal that was not rigorous would not be fair to either of us. We agreed on a number between his initial expectation and my initial offer, a number that reflected the genuine value of what he had built with a realistic adjustment for the structural problems. He signed on a Saturday afternoon. I had been in that conference room for the final session for 3 hours. When the papers were signed, Kevin sat back in his chair and he looked at me and he said, "What happens now?" I said, "You stay on as CEO for a transition period, 18 months. You help us understand the business and the customer relationships and the product roadmap. After the transition period, you can stay in an advisory role or you can pursue the next thing. Either is fine." He said, "And you fix the cost structure." I said, "We fix the cost structure." He said, "Together." I said, "That is what an 18-month transition looks like. Yes, together." He was quiet. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "Kevin." He said, "No, I do. I owe you an apology that is about 30 years overdue, and I want to say it while we are sitting here because the alternative is not saying it, and that is not the right choice." I waited. He said, "I told our family that you were not the one who made things happen. I said it because I was afraid that you were more capable than me in ways that I could not compete with directly, and I decided the way to handle that was to manage the story instead of accepting the reality." He said, "You are more capable than me in those ways. You were always more capable in those ways." He said, "And I should have said something a long time ago." I looked at my brother across the table. He had the same jaw as our father, the same way of holding his hands when he was being completely direct rather than performing. I said, "Kevin, you are not less capable than me. You are differently capable. You built a product that people pay money for every month. That is a specific skill that I could not have done the way you did it. I can analyze a business. I cannot build one from inside the way you built Pinnacle." He said, "That sounds like you being generous." I said, "It sounds like the accurate version of what happened. You built the thing. I am buying the thing. Both required something real." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Dad is going to need an explanation." I said, "Dad is going to listen to whatever we tell him and say okay, and go back to whatever he is reading." Kevin almost smiled. He said, "Yeah, probably. Subscribe right now because the next section is the one where we tell our parents and where our father says exactly what you would expect our father to say. Stay with me." We called our parents together. Not immediately, a week after the papers were signed, once both of us had had time to process what had happened and to figure out what to say and how to say it. Kevin suggested the call. He came to me with the suggestion, and I want to note that specifically because it communicated something about where he was in that week after the closing. He was not managing the conversation. He was trying to get to the honest version of it. He said we should call Mom and Dad together, tell them what happened. I said okay. He said, "I want to be the one to explain about the Christmas dinner comment." I said, "You do not have to do that. He said, I want to. We called on a Sunday afternoon. Our mother answered. She called our father to the phone. They both got on, the way they always got on for important calls, my mother holding her phone and my father picking up the landline extension in the kitchen because he had never fully trusted speaker phones. Kevin said, we have something to tell you. Our mother said, okay. Kevin said, Aaron's company bought my company. Silence. Our mother said, what? Kevin said, Aaron owns a private equity holding company called Meridian Capital Group. He has been running it since 2007. They acquired Pinnacle Tech Solutions. I sold my company to my brother. Our father said, Aaron. I said, yes. Our father said, you own a company. I said, I own a holding company. Meridian has 6 portfolio companies. Pinnacle is the newest. Our father said, since 2007. I said, yes. He was quiet. He said, and you did not say anything. I said, you never asked for the performance version of things, Dad. You asked if I was happy and if I was building something real. I was. Long silence. Our mother said, Aaron James Whitfield. I said, Mom. She said, you have been running a private equity company for 17 years, and you never once mentioned it at a family dinner. I said, I mentioned I was working on acquisitions. She said, you mentioned it in the way that you mentioned everything, which is so briefly that I could not tell if it was significant or not. I said, I did not think it needed to be announced. She said, your brother announced when he got a new phone. Kevin said, that is accurate. She said, Kevin, stop. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that I had not expected. She said, I always knew. I said, you knew what? She said, not the specifics. I knew that what you were building was significant. You just had that quality since you were 8 years old following your father around with his tools. The quality of someone who was building something that did not need to be announced because it was going to speak for itself eventually. I sat with that. Our father said, Kevin. Kevin said, yes, Dad. Our father said, the comment at Christmas dinner. Kevin said, I know, Dad. Our father said, you should not have said that. Kevin said, I know. Our father said, both of my sons are successful. That has always been true. One of them told people about it and one of them did not. Neither of those things changed what the other one was. He said it simply. The way he said most things. Kevin said, I know that now. Our father said, you knew it before. You just wanted people to agree with you. Kevin said, yes. Our father said, okay. And that was it. He asked about Renata. He asked about the weather. He went back to whatever he had been reading. Our mother stayed on the line for another 45 minutes and asked specific questions about the company and the acquisition, and what came next, and whether this meant Aaron and Renata were planning to have children yet. She had been asking this question for 12 years, and the acquisition of a holding company was not going to distract her from it. It was the most normal conversation. Which was right. Because what had happened was not a drama. It was just the honest account of two people taking different paths for a long time, and those paths converging at a specific conference room table on a Saturday afternoon. Kevin and I had dinner together the following week. Just the two of us. A steakhouse in Scottsdale that he had suggested, and that was the kind of place he had been suggesting for dinner for 20 years. Good food, visible price point. The specific environment he felt comfortable in. I had eaten in enough of these restaurants to be comfortable in them too, and I did not care about the choice. We talked for 3 hours. Real conversation. The kind we had never had as brothers because the managed version of our relationship had taken up all the space. He told me about Pinnacle, the real version, not the performance version he had been giving at family dinners. The hard years of building the product before there was customer validation. The co-founder conflict in year 2 that had almost ended the company. The specific terror of payroll in month 11 of year 3, when the capital was tighter than he had told anyone. I listened to all of it. I said, "That is a harder story than the one I heard at dinners." He said, "That is because the story at dinners was for the audience. This is the actual thing." I said, "The actual thing is more impressive." He said, "It does not feel that way because it includes all the scared parts." I said, "The scared parts are the ones that tell you what something actually costs to build." He said, "You were scared too." I said, 2008 was the most frightening professional year of my life." He said, "You never said anything." I said, "Renata knew." He said, "She always knows everything." I said, "That is why I married her." We stayed at the restaurant until they were politely clearing tables around us. On the way out, Kevin said, "Aaron." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I am glad it was you." I said, "What?" He said, "Who bought the company? I am glad it was you and not some corporate fund that had no idea what they were buying." I said, "We had a very good idea of what we were buying." He said, "I know, that is what I mean." He looked at the parking lot. He said, "I would not have sold it to someone who did not understand what it was." I said, "I understood what it was. I have been watching you build it since the beginning." He said, "I know." He said, "Thank you for that." I said, "Go home, Kevin." He went home. I stood in the parking lot for a moment. I called Renata. She said, "How was dinner?" I said, "Good." She said, "The real version." I said, "The real version, it was good." She said, "Come home." I came home. The transition period at Pinnacle went the way it went when two people who genuinely understood what they were doing worked on something together with honest communication and clear goals. Kevin stayed 18 months. He was the best version of himself in those 18 months, not the performance version, the working version. He knew the product and the customers and the market in ways that my team did not and could not have developed quickly enough to avoid real damage. His knowledge was essential, and he contributed it fully and without the specific ego protection that he had brought to his public persona for 30 years. He left on good terms. He came back to family dinners, and he talked about Pinnacle in the past tense, and he asked me questions about what Meridian was doing in the present tense, with the specific genuine curiosity of someone who was interested rather than positioning. It was the version of a brother I had not had since we were children. I am not going to tell you everything resolved perfectly, and that Kevin became a different person overnight. He is still Kevin. He still tells a good story. He still has a quality of performance in how he moves through rooms. But the story he tells now is the honest version, the one with the scared parts. And the rooms he moves through now are rooms where I am not the person he is competing with. That is enough. That is actually a lot. Subscribe right now because the final section and the outro are where I tell you what happened to Pinnacle under Meridian's ownership and what it means for what comes next for both of us. Pinnacle Tech Solutions under Meridian Capital Group's ownership became a different company in the best possible sense. Not unrecognizable, the product was still the product Kevin had built, and the customers were still the customers Kevin had acquired, and the fundamental market opportunity was still the one Kevin had identified from his years in construction software consulting. The core was his. We were clear about this internally and externally. What changed was the structure around the core. The cost base came down 28% in the first 8 months through a combination of vendor renegotiations, operational consolidation, and the elimination of 3 roles that had been created for growth projections that were not materializing. None of these were easy decisions. Two of the three roles were people I would have liked to keep in different circumstances. We handled every separation with full severance and genuine support, because the company's financial stress was not their fault, and the decent thing to do was to make the transition as manageable as possible. The go-to-market model was rebuilt from the ground up. Kevin's model had been built around a direct enterprise sales approach that required a large sales team and long sales cycles. My analysis had identified a different approach, a product-led growth model, where the product's ease of use would allow smaller customers to adopt it with minimal sales involvement, which would expand the total addressable market significantly while reducing the cost per customer acquired. We piloted this for 6 months alongside the existing model. The pilot outperformed the existing model by a factor of 3. We transitioned fully to the product-led model. Revenue grew. Not immediately. The first 9 months of the new model were flat while the old pipeline converted and the new pipeline built. This was expected. I had modeled it. My investors understood it. We held the course. In month 10, revenue inflected upward. By the end of Pinnacle's first full year under Meridian ownership, it had grown revenue by 22% on a significantly reduced cost base. By year 2, it had grown another 31%. The unit economics were the best in the sector. Kevin saw all of this from his transition role and from the advisory position he maintained afterward. He called me after the year 2 numbers came in. He said, "You were right about the model." I said, "The data was right about the model." He said the same thing. I said, "I had a team that could read the data correctly." He said the same thing. He was quiet. He said, "Aaron, what is the company worth now?" I told him the current valuation estimate based on the improved metrics. He was quiet for a longer time. He said, "That is more than double what you paid for it." I said, "Yes." He said, "In 2 years." I said the underlying value was there. The structure needed work. He said, "I built the underlying value." I said, "You built the underlying value." He said, "And you fixed the structure." I said, "Yes." He said, "And now it is worth double." I said, "Yes." He said, "That is what you do. You see the value that is there and you build the structure that lets it actually be worth what it is." I said, "That is the job." He said, "I thought the job was building the thing." I said, "It is both jobs. You need both. You build the thing and I build the structure that makes the thing worth what it should be worth." He said, "We would have been a good partnership from the beginning." I said, "Yes." He said, "If I had not spent 30 years telling everyone you were just an analyst." I said, "Kevin." He said, "I know, we are past it." I said, "We are past it." He said, "I am starting something new." I said, "Tell me." He told me about the new company, a different sector, logistics technology rather than construction software. He had been watching a problem in the last-mile delivery space that he thought had a software solution. He had been talking to potential customers. He had validated that the pain was real and that people would pay for the solution. I said, "That sounds like a real problem." He said, "It is." I said, "Who are the co-founders?" He told me. I said, "What is the capital need to get to proof of concept?" He told me. I said, "Meridian does early-stage investments in specific circumstances. Send me the deck." He said, "Aaron, I cannot be another Pinnacle." I said, "It would not be another Pinnacle. This is different market, different stage, different structure. Send me the deck." He said, "You want to invest in my company?" I said, "I want to read your deck and decide whether I want to invest in your company." He said, "What if the answer is no?" I said, "Then the answer is no, and you find another investor and I wish you well." He said, "And if it is yes?" I said, Then we talk about terms like professionals. He said, no family discount. I said, absolutely no family discount. Full market terms. You would not want it any other way, and neither would I. He sent the deck. I read it. I called a meeting with my investment committee. We asked Kevin to present. He presented. The investment committee asked hard questions. Kevin answered them the way he answered things when he was working rather than performing. Directly, with the specific knowledge of someone who had done the homework and understood the market and had the honest version of the answers ready. The committee met afterward. The consensus was, the problem is real, the team has relevant experience, the market is large, the risks are manageable. We led the seed round. Kevin called me after the term sheet was signed. He said, "You are going to be my investor." I said, "Yes." He said, "You are going to send me a board deck template and ask for monthly reporting." I said, "Quarterly," and yes. He said, "And if I miss a milestone, you are going to call me." I said, "I will call you the way I call all my portfolio founders, directly, with the specific question about what happened and what the plan is." He said, "You are going to be hard on me." I said, "I am going to be fair with you, the same way I am fair with everyone. Your name does not change the standards." He said, "Good." He said it with the specific sincerity of someone who actually meant it. He meant it. Our father came to Phoenix in the fall of that year. He was 73. He had retired from the hotel chain 4 years earlier, and he had done what he always did with his time. He had found things to fix, and fix he had. His neighbor's fence, the community center's HVAC system, which he had looked at and called me about because he recognized what was wrong with it and wanted my opinion on the contractor quote they had received. I told him the contractor quote was 20% high, and the diagnosis was partially correct. He thanked me and went back to the neighbor's fence. He came to Phoenix, and Renata cooked a real dinner. The specific kind of dinner she cooked when someone she wanted to honor was coming. The Oaxacan dishes she had grown up with, and that took most of a day to make correctly. Kevin came too. The 4 of us sat at the table in the house that Renata and I had lived in for 11 years, and the meal was the specific kind of meal that did not need to be more than it was because what it was already enough. Our father ate with the deliberate appreciation of someone who understood that a meal like this was a gift and who received it accordingly. He looked around the table. He said, "This is good." He said it simply, the way he said everything. Then he went back to eating. Renata looked at me across the table. I looked at her. We did not say anything. We did not need to. This was what it was all for. The 2 years at Crestline, the grad school nights, the 2008 crisis and the midnight kitchen conversations, and the 5 distressed acquisitions that required everything we had to turn around. The 17 years of building something in the background while Kevin was announcing things at Christmas dinners. All of it was always for this. The table, the people at it, the specific quiet satisfaction of having built something real that produced a life that was also real. My father, at 73, still had the hands of a man who fixed things, still looked at broken systems and understood what was wrong with them and what would make them work correctly again. He had taught me that before he knew he was teaching me anything. I owed him everything I had built. Let me say the most important thing before you go. That conference room in Phoenix on a Saturday afternoon was not the moment I won anything. The moment I won was the morning I sat at a desk in Crestline Capital in 2001 and built a financial model that started with the honest number instead of the impressive number. That was the moment. Every conference room and every signed paper and every portfolio company that followed came from that one decision to start from what was real rather than what looked good. Kevin built things by announcing them. He needed the audience to make the building feel real to himself. I built things in the background because the building was the point, and it did not require an audience to be real. Neither of those approaches is morally superior. They are just different. And for 30 years, they produced two brothers who were building in genuinely different ways without acknowledging what the other one was actually doing. The conference room forced the acknowledgement. And the acknowledgement produced something that 30 years of family dinners had not produced. An honest conversation between two brothers about what each of them had actually built and what it had actually cost. Kevin's apology in that conference room was real. His comment at Christmas dinner had been real too, real in the sense that he had genuinely believed it. He had genuinely believed that I was the one who executed other people's ideas, because he had spent 30 years building a story about us, and the story required me to be in a supporting role. The story was wrong. But the man who told the story was my brother, and the man who told the story was also the man who built a product that real customers paid real money for every month, and who walked into a board presentation with my investment committee and answered the hard questions without the performance version. Both things were true. That is the part I want you to hold. People are not their worst moments, and they are not their best moments. They are the full account. Kevin at Christmas dinner and Kevin in that boardroom are the same person. The person at Christmas dinner was running from something he was afraid of. The person in the boardroom had stopped running. I am proud of the brother who stopped running. I am also proud of the company I built while he was figuring that out. Both things can be true. Both things are. If you are building something right now that nobody knows about, something in the background, something that does not have an audience yet, keep going. The conference room moment comes. It comes differently for everyone, but it comes. And when it comes, you want to be standing there with the real thing behind you rather than the story about the real thing. Build the real thing. Start from the honest number. Do the work that does not require an audience. The rest follows. Hit that like button if any part of this story stayed with you. Subscribe to this channel, new story every week, everyone worth the time. Drop a comment and tell me something that this story brought up for you. Tell me about the thing you are building that nobody knows about yet. Tell me where you are watching from. I read every comment, every single one. Thank you for being here.